They say a person's final words reveal a lot about their true character, their hopes, their fears, their undying love. What can we learn from the final words of Jesus? As he was led to the cross, where he would hang in unimaginable agony, his last words before giving up his spirit were not of bitterness or defeat, but of forgiveness, redemption, and trust in the one who sent him. Through these words, we will discover the unparalleled depth of Jesus' character, his unwavering commitment to humanity, and his profound love for the lost that he came to seek and save. These are his final moments. These are his famous last words.
I love a good last word. I love it when you're watching a movie or you hear a story of someone who is famous, powerful, and knowing what their last word was. It seems to sum up their story. It seems to tell us what's really important to them. Some of my favorite last words include the man who my high school was named after. Now, when I first learned about who my high school was named after, I thought, that doesn't sound too exciting. He actually was a spy who got caught. So that kind of makes him a spy who was bad at his job, right? But then I realized the reason that he was famous wasn't because that he was a spy that got caught, but because of the last thing he said. His name is Nathan Hale. He's painted here in the center. He's kind of got a fabulous little stance, if you ask me. Nathan Hale, he's from Connecticut, like I am. And he was high school was named after him in the state of Wisconsin, where I went to high school. His famous last word was, as he was being brought to his own demise by the British troops, he said, "My only regret is that I have but one life to lose for my country." And that's the sort of thing that when you're fighting a revolutionary war can then really galvanize people to keep battling and keep fighting. He's more famous for the last thing he said than anything he actually did in his life. Another great last word that I enjoy is that of Oscar Wilde. He wrote The Importance of Being Earnest, other poems and plays. He was dying of meningitis, pretty young. I think he was about 48 or something as he was dying. And his last word is more comical than meaningful, but it makes sense for someone who spent their life writing. He said, "My wallpaper and I are fighting a duel to the death. One or the other of us has to go." It's quite a final thing to say. There's great final last words in fiction as well. Obi-Wan Kenobi from Star Wars, right before Darth Vader puts him to death, says, "You can't win, Darth. If you strike me down, I shall become more powerful than you can possibly imagine." There's foreshadowing in that. And we do believe and sense that there's some sort of power in the last things that someone has to say. We worry, in fact, if a loved one of ours dies and the last thing we said to them was words of anger or frustration. We believe that what might be uttered out of their last breaths on their deathbed might be words of wisdom, or a bit of summing up their lives, or revealing what was truly valuable or meaningful to them. Even at the end of a good movie or good book, the last words can sum up the values and the meanings and the lives lived in them. This series is going to be about the last words of Jesus. Jesus is recorded as saying 7 things while suffering and dying on the cross. And so with only 7 things that Jesus has to say across the 4 Gospels combined, we believe in the church that there might be some sort of wisdom that can be pulled from these moments. He knows he is dying and his lungs are emptying of air. His veins are emptying of blood. His body is emptying of life. There's only so much energy or power in which he can even speak. And so his words are chosen carefully. And the gospel writers have carefully preserved these moments for us. So let's lean in together and ask, what might Jesus be saying about himself, his ministry, about God with the last moments he has to speak to us. And so today we're going to start with Luke chapter 23, and we're going to read verses 32 to 38, which includes the first of Jesus' 7 sayings on the cross. I'd invite you, if you would, to stand with me as we honor the reading of the word of the Lord today. Luke chapter 23, verses 32 to 38. 2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. When they came to a place called the Skull, they crucified him there, along with the criminals, one on his right and the other on his left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. The people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. They said, "He saved others, let him save himself. If he is God's Messiah, the chosen one." The soldiers also came up and mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar and said, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was written notice above him, which read, "This is the King of the Jews." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. The first of Jesus' 7 words on the cross, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Thought about these words a lot this week. There's power in these words. There's a central sense of the whole gospel in these words. There is a real sense that this is the project of Jesus found in these words. But something gave me particular pause this week as I was thinking about this. This is a prayer. It's a prayer from Jesus, who we Christians call the second person of the Trinity, to God the Father, who we call the first person of the Trinity. And so you're in for a bit of a theology lesson this week, if you will. I assume you've heard of this concept of the Trinity before, the belief that God is one God, but within this God is 3 persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. There's a joke in theology class, if you ever take that on the way to becoming pastors, that if you want to avoid speaking heresy while talking about the Trinity, the best way to do so is to say nothing at all about the Trinity. And so I'm going to tread very carefully with you. But one of the ways I like to think about what is happening in the Trinity, a moment like this, a strange moment where one person of the Trinity is praying to another person of the Trinity that we assert is one God, is an old theological concept called perichoresis. And the basic idea of perichoresis is that God is like a dance. That inside of this one God is these 3 people moving in such unity and unison with one another, which makes them one whole. This year, my daughter Mackenzie has gotten very much into watching Dancing with the Stars, which is an experience that I got introduced into because I love my daughter Mackenzie, and she's going off to college, so I take extra interest in anything she'll let me be a part of. And so I watch dances on Dancing with the Stars, things I don't understand and don't think I will ever understand. But I do know that on some of these dances, like for example the tango, if you've ever seen that before, that there's such an incredible unison in their movement that if it's done very well, you lose which one is which. Because if you were easily able to identify one moving out of sync with the other, it's no longer the dance whatsoever. The dance needs partners who are in complete rhythm with one another, to the point that their dance complements each other to the point that you're like, this is one dance rather than 2 dancers. This is a bit of a metaphor that should help us understand what is happening in the Trinity. Sure, they are two persons, but yet it is one inner life of God. And so when Jesus is praying to God, it's almost as if we're invited to hear the mind of God. It's the inner monologue of God, if you will. What is your inner monologue like? When you're being wronged, what are you telling yourself? Probably that you deserve better, or that you're not being dealt with fairly. Or perhaps your inner monologue when you're being treated horribly might be, I am going to get justice, or I am going to get revenge. That seems normal, if you will. But the inner monologue of God is very different than our own inner monologue. Jesus, rather than plotting his revenge, Jesus, rather than expressing how angry he is, Jesus, rather than expressing how wronged he is, instead looks out on the very men who are treating him wrongly and unfairly. And rather than plotting his revenge or expressing his anger or his frustration, the inner monologue of Jesus with the Father is, forgive them. On the cross, when Jesus is unfairly crucified, unjustly crucified, when his suffering has begun, nails are in his hands and air is escaping from his lungs. It's at that moment we would think he would be angry. And instead, he's looking down on the people inflicting this wound on him, and he's praying to God, forgive them. I suspect this makes very little sense to the way our own inner monologue works. This is not typical for who we are when we're being wronged. But I want you to know that this is typical for who God is, even when God is being wronged. In fact, this posture is the posture of Jesus all throughout Scriptures. Even if we move to Romans in chapter 8, we're told that this is who Jesus is on behalf of those who have sinned. Romans 8:34 says, who then is the one that condemns? No one. Christ Jesus, who died, more than that, who was raised to life, is at the right hand of God and is also interceding for us. Jesus, through his crucifixion and resurrection, has chosen to use this as a method in which to continue to pray to God. He intercedes for us. The inner monologue of God, both on the cross and in heaven today, is Jesus pleading for forgiveness for us. And my suspicion is none of us have wronged Jesus quite as severely as poking nails through his hands and his feet and executing him. And yet, the very inner monologue of God is to intercede for us. And so I ask you today, what if the inner life of God, the internal monologue of God, is rooting for you to be forgiven? What if that is what God is up to at his very heart and in his very core? We tend to have a tendency to lean into the judgment of God because we can understand why God would be angry. In fact, if we were to judge ourselves, chances are we would judge ourselves harshly. We know more than anyone else how greedy we've been, how selfish we've been, how violent we've been, how difficult we've been. In my own heart and in my own mind, I cannot hide the truth of what I feel, what I am, what I've done. I've been there for every little bit of it. And oftentimes and I imagine you as well, have a hard time giving myself the benefit of the doubt. I know that I have sinned against God. And when I spend time thinking about those sins, I feel this incredible grief. Why would I do that? Why would I ignore God? Why would I turn my back on God? Why would I do what I know was wrong? even when I know I've been called to a higher standard? Why would I do that? And when I spend time in this sin, when I rerun the bloopers and the worst moments of my life, the times that I'm ashamed and embarrassed, I feel that I deserve the judgment of God. Have you been there before? But these words of Jesus remind us that it's not on me to justify myself before God. I don't have to prepare a defense for my worst moments. Think about this story here. Jesus takes it a step further than just forgiving them. He doesn't just say to God, hey, God, would you forgive them? The second part of the statement is at least as compelling and as strange and as shocking as the first part of the statement. Because Jesus doesn't just say, Father, would you forgive them? That would be powerful enough. That would be gospel enough. That would be good news enough. But Jesus goes even further to say, for they know not what they are doing. He asks forgiveness before they justify themselves. They have not stood before an eternal God judging them yet. At this moment, these Roman soldiers, let's be honest with ourselves, they kind of do know what they're doing. They're standing for the values that matter to them in life. They are there executing Roman power, Roman peace, Roman prosperity. They know what they're doing. They're executing the will of Caesar, and they are on the side of executing the will of Caesar. They know what they're doing on the one hand. But on the other hand, through the eyes of God, Jesus looks down from the cross and says they really don't see the whole picture. They really don't understand the battle between good and evil that they're fighting. They don't understand how they are on the wrong side of the battle of good and evil. They don't fully grasp the implications of what they're doing. And Jesus wants forgiveness for them before they understand the full implications of what they have done. Now, if you ever got in trouble with a teacher or a cop or a parent in your life, typically they want you to understand the implications of what you have done before you receive pardon. That's how we work. And there's good reason for that, because there's growth out of understanding the implications of what we have done. But here, Jesus is so focused on forgiveness that he doesn't even demand that they understand the implications of what they've done before he pleads with God that they would be forgiven. Father, forgive them, for they know not. Even before they know, even before they understand what they do. The forgiveness of Jesus is an antidote to our sin. Sin isn't just simply a transgression. Sin is like an illness. It's like a disease that infects our world, infects our mind, and infects our souls, and causes us to live outside of God's will. It causes us to want to long for things that are outside of God's will. Sin is something that I'm not sure we could just get a handle on and control in our own minds, in our own lives. In fact, sin is almost like a disease that someone might go to the hospital for. And imagine, if you will, someone checks themselves into an emergency room unsure of what's wrong with them, but knowing that they're deeply sick and sensing that life is spilling out of them. Imagine they go back into a room and doctors fill the room and nurses fill the room, and they begin to hook them up to monitors and tubes. They bring them in for MRIs and they search and they seek. They understand the symptoms, but they don't know what's causing it. And before long, they begin to start discussing what might be a diagnosis. And imagine if they find some sort of rare but serious infection. What the doctor would then prescribe is an antibiotic that's specific to that particular infection. And the antibiotic would come in, they would put it in their IV, and they would fill their body with antibiotic. And the antibiotic is the cure for the infection. We all know that, but until you can recognize what the infection is, chances are that infection will take over a healthy body and kill it. But when an antibiotic enters into the system, it cleans out the infection at its core and makes the patient well again. Sin is like hard to define illness in our own heart, in our own life. And the only cure, like an antibiotic is the only cure to an infection, the only cure to the sin that infects our body system is the forgiveness that Jesus offers. And see this story for what it is. He's hanging on the cross, counting down the minutes of life that he has left. Blood is beginning to pour down his body. His lungs are beginning to constrict. He is suffering. And he looks down above the sinners who are perpetuating against him most directly. And he does not condemn them. He does not have anger towards him. Instead, we're given this look into the inner monologue of God. We see who God is and what the mind and the heart of God is like most clearly in this moment. And rather than condemnation, Jesus offers forgiveness. Now, you've not nailed a piercing nail into the hands or feet of Jesus. But I suspect that in your own monologue, there's been moments of guilt that you might even be struggling to forgive yourself for. There are stories and moments and hurts and struggles and histories and pasts and mistakes that play over and over in the story of your own mind. But if Jesus can forgive the men who nailed him to the cross, I suspect he's interested in forgiving you as well. And so when Jesus, in his last hour, says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do," I sense that extends to you and I as well. That what Jesus wants to do and who Jesus wants to be is a God who forgives, who gives us a fresh start, a start over, who gives us a new beginning, who doesn't leave us in the trail of our sins, but instead opens us up to the possibility of being reborn and remade. This is the gospel. This is the heart of God. And so today, as we conclude, I'm going to have some pastors and leaders of the church come forward. We've got cards for each of the sermon series that we have. It's a piece of art. It's a business card size. And each week, we're going to have the opportunity to respond to the sermon, to receive this word as if it was meant for you. On it is a piece of art that you'll also see on the back wall by the soundboard as well. There's going to be a different one every week, a different piece of art each and every week with the saying. And it's going to be like collect them all, right? You want them all, come to church every week till Easter. That's pretty sneaky, isn't it? But we want you to collect them. But we want you to receive them not just as a collection, but to come forward and to receive as if these words really are meant for you. That you could come forward and take it, not as taking a card, but as receiving this good news of gospel for yourself. That this is meant for you. Not for your neighbor, not someone who's lived a cleaner or better life than you, not someone who has it more together than you. But when you come and receive it, you receive it as a word given to you. Jesus, looking down on us, wants to forgive us. And in receiving this forgiveness, we are made new. We have a fresh start. Life begins again. And our guilt and our shame and our past no longer need to define us. And so as the worship team plays, if you would like, I invite you to stand and come and receive this gospel, this good news for yourself. And receive it with joy and thanksgiving. Let's sing together.